Okay, so you're going RV shopping and you decide to get in the car, head out to your local RV dealership or whatever RV dealership you elect to go to. And you want to specifically see what you need to look for around and inside of your RV from a non-floor plan related perspective. What does that mean? The things that you should concentrate on regardless of the floor plan. And we're going to talk about some of those things today because I know a lot of people watch me tour RVs. So hang tight, I'll be right back. All right, before we kick this video off, I want to give a big shout out to the folks over at RV SnapPads for sponsoring this video. RV SnapPads are these really awesome, super robust rubber pads that snap onto the landing gear leveling system and front tongue jack of your trailer. Basically what they do is they widen your footprint, so they give you a wider contact patch with the ground. They protect your actual leveling feet because in most cases it's just steel or powder coated steel, and the rubber gives you like an inch thick pad that protects them from contact with whatever you may be on. And finally, they also dampen some of the road vibration into your RV. So if you have a lot of vehicles driving by, if you're next to a busy highway, it keeps some of that vibration from transferring inside. Super robust, absolutely awesome, made from recycled rubber material. These are available through my channel sponsor, etrailer.com. So take a look in the description of this video if you're interested in picking up a set of RV SnapPads. All right, so as we dive into this video, I know a lot of people watch my outside RV tours and they think that I'm focusing in on things that they should focus in on. And in many cases I am. But let's, in this video, focus on the primary things that I think are pretty important. Now we're going to use our fifth wheel as an example, but many of these things are going to be pretty much universal across almost any towable type of RV. Not necessarily motorhomes, simply because a lot of the mechanical and structural differences that exist between the two are going to make them very dissimilar. Anyways, when I look at fifth wheels, one of the first things I point to is whether it has a drop frame or a straight frame. A straight frame simply means that the frame of it, which is typically going to be an I-beam frame, is going to stretch front to back or back to front, and it's going to be one solid beam. When I talk about a drop frame, it's going to have a drop beam right here that attaches to the main beam. What is the purpose of a drop beam? Well, the drop beam just gives you a lot more storage inside because you don't have to worry about that beam, which is right about here, taking up or bumping up into the space inside of your storage. So I focus on drop beams, but I don't necessarily focus on them as being something that's a perk. I focus on them to the degree of how structural they are to the frame of the RV. So for instance, I always appreciate on a large fifth wheel to have a 10-inch tall I-beam section as your drop frame attached to a 12-inch main beam. Some RVs will have an 8-inch drop frame section attached to a 12-inch beam, or some will have an 8-inch attached to a 10-inch, or even a 6-inch attached to a 10-inch. And in my opinion, if you have a larger, heavier fifth wheel, you're going to want the most robust frame possible. And I always appreciate when manufacturers put a thicker, taller I-beam section for the main drop beam section of a fifth wheel. But that's why I focus in on that. If you have a solid non-drop beam fifth wheel, believe it or not, those tend to be the lower cost fifth wheels because a drop beam is typically going to be, or a drop frame is typically going to be reminiscent of your larger, more luxury fifth wheels, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make it stronger because a solid I-beam front to back is actually, from a mechanical perspective, likely to have less failure points than something that you've attached to the main beam, but then has to shoot back up over the front over here. So not having a drop frame on your fifth wheel is something that might be appealing to some because it limits a failure point. It removes a failure point in essence. Now you could still, of course, bend a frame, but it's a bit less likely that you're going to do that type of damage. Now, drop frame damage on fifth wheels is very rare. You don't see it very often. Typically, if you see some type of failure, it's going to be in this front overhang portion right here. That's where most of your leverage is. But I rarely see any in this area here. So even if it has, you know, an 8-inch I-beam drop frame on a 12-inch main beam, again, it's very unlikely you're going to see a failure of that component unless it just has a shoddy weld. Now, moving on, you know, I usually point out whether or not it's going to have an automatic leveling system or a scissor jack system or a manual leveling system. And I usually point out whether it's going to be a 4 or a 6 or a 2-way leveling system or stabilization system. Now, a leveling system is different than a stabilization system. Leveling is designed to level off or make small adjustments to your RV when it's on a relatively flat pad that essentially makes the inside of it perfectly level, and it's an automatic process. If you have manual jacks, well, typically those are just going to be for stabilization, which means it's just going to keep the thing from rocking around or moving that much while you're inside. Now there's really two flavors of auto leveling. One's going to be electronic. In the case of Lippert or LCI, they call it their ground control system, and one's going to be hydraulic. They call it their level up system. Hydraulic systems are going to be faster. They are going to have more lifting power, but if the system has a problem, you could lose your hydraulic fluid, or you could have a mess. You can have a bigger problem, in my opinion. With the electronic systems, if you have a failure or a component that breaks, typically it's not going to disable the entire system. And even if you do have a failure, you can typically disable that one jack and still use the rest of them. So, you know, at least until you get it fixed. It's not advised to run your system without all of its, you know, proper leveling down on the ground. However, with electronic, I've just found replacing a motor to be a lot simpler than trying to do hydraulic work on the level up system. But, you know, a lot of RVers watch this channel. What is your opinion of the system that you have on your fifth wheel or travel trailer? And do you prefer electric or do you prefer hydraulic? Electric is much slower, and it typically doesn't have quite the lifting power. However, it's still, in my opinion, a more reliable system than the hydraulic, but they're both really good systems. And your super luxury high-end fifth wheels will almost always have the hydraulic version of this system. But just keep in mind, you know, serviceability can be important, and having a good dealership that you work with that can service it if you have a problem can also be really important. As I move farther along, I'll almost universally focus on the type of tires that are on your RV. On ours, we have an aftermarket. It's a Continental HTL Plus Eco 2. It is a J-rated tire. It's super, super overkill, but typically you're probably going to have a relatively low-cost tire on a lighter travel trailer or fifth wheel, upwards to a very good tire on a super luxury brand, like a high-end Goodyear or a Saloon tire. But on your mid-size fifth wheels and your heavier travel trailers, you're likely to have a reasonable quality tire, even if it's by a generic manufacturer. So you could have like you know, you could have a Sterling G-rated tire on a fifth wheel, or you could have a Goodyear Endurance, which is a decent tire. I'm not going to say it's the best, but it is a decent tire. If you have an entry or what many would consider to be a budget fifth wheel or RV or travel trailer, you always want to try to make sure that you get a good quality tire on your RV as soon as possible, especially if you've heard or if you've read reviews of people that are having tire failure. If that's a headache you can avoid while traveling, I definitely recommend ponying up, you know, the $1,000 to get you a set of brand new tires that are really, really well designed and rated for your RV. Now, when we look at suspension, I always talk about whether or not an RV has an upgraded suspension system. Now, the suspension on this specific RV is a system that came with it. This is the LCI Road Armor suspension. You can see it's an upgraded equalizer. It has 1/2-inch thick shackle straps. Those are those little pieces right there. They're greasable bolts that go inside of them, so you can service them really easily. And this center suspension equalizer is has rubber bushings on both the top and bottom to help dampen road jitter and vibration and shock from traveling to the chassis of your RV. Now, having an upgraded equalizer, I think, is super important. Having that along with quality tires and easy to service components is even more important. But dialing in the alignment of your trailer and balancing the tires on your trailer are probably the single most important thing if you want to reduce component failure inside of your RV. Why? Think about it. If you're putting something like this on, or if your RV has something like this and it's helping dampen vibration into your RV, well, if you're doing that there, why wouldn't you want to dampen the vibration of a tire that's out of balance as well? Because, you know, on your vehicle, if your tire's out of balance, your vehicle is going to be shaking. It's the same thing with an RV. So if you get an RV and you don't have balanced tires, all you're doing is adding additional shake, additional vibration, rattling to the inside of your RV. What is that going to do? It's going to cause things to break. It's going to cause things to be disconnected. It's going to cause things to move around and fall over. So if you upgrade your equalizer, if you have a good equalizer, if you don't have balanced tires, you're forcing your equalizer to do double work when it doesn't have to, right? Get your tires balanced. It's super cheap. You can typically get it done at a truck stop, a truck tire shop, or even a discount tire, depending on the size of your RV and the type of tires you have. But get your tires balanced. It's super important. Now, I talk about awnings. I usually focus on, you know, where the awnings are, how long they are, if you have more than one. You know, awnings are one of those things that are really going to be useful if it's sunny outside and you're trying to cover up your campsite area. But you also want to keep an eye on where the awnings are in relation to where your campsite might be, because if where you're camping doesn't really give you practical use of your awnings by actually covering up what you're camping next to, then it's kind of pointless, right? So awning placement can be really important. What I usually like to see is an awning that doesn't have to cover the slide. What do I mean by that? On a lot of RVs, the awning is actually mounted to the sidewall above the slide, and it has to come out and then extend beyond the actual slide being stuck out. So you lose a lot of shade because it's there. I like to see RVs that put the awning on the actual slide, because then it will just extend out from the slide and you'll have a much larger swath of area that you're actually shielding from the sun. So that's something I look for. On the back, you know, I mentioned bumpers a lot. A lot of RVs just don't have bumpers anymore, and in many cases they've done it to reduce weight and cost. I like to see the bumper because I like to see a place for you to be able to mount things. I like to see a place for you to be able to throw your sewer hose into, and in my opinion, it's nice just to have something back there in case, you know, the person behind you in traffic accidentally kisses the back end of your RV. It's good to have some structure there that they'll hit before they actually hit your RV. Coming around, placement of your power cable, I usually like to see it towards the back corner of the RV. Now we have ours back here. Ideally, I probably would have liked to see it up here. I don't care to see it when it's way up here or towards the front, because typically your pedestal is going to be at about the halfway point or further back. And if your pedestal is behind your RV, kind of like ours is right here, it can make it very difficult to have a cable that will actually reach that far without having to back your RV up too far. And typically you're going to have to go buy a larger cable. Now, windows, framed versus frameless. We have frameless on this fifth wheel, and that's mainly because the Brookstone, which is considered kind of like a semi-luxury brand, uses frameless windows, and it's more for cosmetic than anything. Ours happen to be dual pane, which means they're going to block a lot of the heat transfer from getting into the RV. And believe it or not, it's actually pretty functional. They do a good job of that. A framed window looks like this. It's going to have this rubber edge that goes around. It's going to stick off. They're not quite as pretty, but some manufacturers have elected to go with all framed windows versus frameless windows simply because you can get more cross ventilation. With this insane wind we have going right now, with a frameless window, you might not feel much of it coming into the RV. With a framed window, if you open that thing up and you open a window across from it, you're going to get a ton of wind coming through, which is really nice. Now we're coming around to this side. This is going to be the outside of the water heater, outside of the furnace. Okay, let's take a look at the wet bay. So the wet bay is going to be the space that houses all of your valves, all of your connections to be able to switch from city water to tank water to bypass, all the different things, including if you have like a refrigerator, typically you'll have the ability to turn on and off your ice maker, open up your low point valves, open up your gray and black tank valves. And for me, what I like to see, regardless of what they use here, in some RVs they use like a Nautilus panel, which is this really nicely cosmetic laid out panel with everything on it. They really don't have room in the Brookstone to put all of that on one panel because they put a lot of features here. I like to see a couple things. I like to see a spot to install a whole house filter if you don't already have one, and I like to see the wet bay closed off from the rest of your storage, just in the event, you know, water starts coming out of one of these, it's not going to get into your traditional storage area, which is really nice. So that's one of the big perks I like about this, is that they added this. This isn't typically something you get on a lot of fifth wheels. Typically it might be open right here, but I really like models that close this section off from the rest. I mean, they call it the wet bay for a reason. So looking under here, I always like to see a radiant material under the floor, as well as an aluminum bath deck and a thick aluminum bath deck. Now, in some travel trailers, it's going to be thinner material, it's going to be smaller lumber, but again, it all really depends on the type of RV, the type of trailer it is, and what the predominant, you know, structure of the RV is constructed of. This right here has a lot of wood in it, but they use a very thick 3-inch aluminum bath deck tubing. And what's nice about that is that this is the structural component for the bathroom above it, hence the name bath deck. One thing that a lot of people have always known about me is I love to see these thick baggage doors. It's about 1.25 inches thick, much thicker than many, very robust. If you compare it to like the propane door, which is only about that thick, this is significantly thicker, denser, heavier duty, and it can definitely take a better beating against things that might jostle around inside and hit up against it. So really like seeing these thick baggage doors, and you're starting to see them on a lot more RVs, not just super high-end models, which is really nice. Slam latches are always nice as well. Propane tanks, I like to see at least 2 20-pound tanks on a travel trailer and 2 30-pound tanks on a fifth wheel. There's some brands out there that put super tiny tanks, or they might only put 1 20-pound tank on a travel trailer, and it's really not enough to do too much unless you're only going to go out for the weekend. Up front, I always talk about the type of hitch or the type of pin box that you have on a fifth wheel versus a travel trailer. You know, the goose box is an option. It's something that we got simply because we really like not having a bunch of clutter in the bed of our truck. And, you know, with this, all you have is a goose ball back there, just like you're hauling a gooseneck trailer. It's the only solution aside from Lippert's own gooseneck conversion that is approved for use on Lippert frames. That's one of the reasons why we went with this. Some people think that this product is gimmicky, but I think almost anybody who has ever installed a Reese Goose Box will tell you the opposite, that it is a very functional, super useful, very, very reliable, and just a really great towing experience when you switch to the Goose Box. So very happy with that product. I don't focus much on whether the RV has a generator or not, since about 99% of RVs will not come with a generator. Some of your super luxury brands will opt them in a little bit more often, but even then, most of the time, it's still an option. When you look at toy haulers, many of your larger toy haulers will have a generator stock, and that's a good thing because, you know, typically you need it for the type of travel you might do in a toy hauler where you go out to the sand dunes or you do boondocking or you're going out, you know, and you're doing dry camping somewhere and you really need to have power to power everything in your RV. So you're starting to see a transition as well from generator power to solar power a lot more, and even the combination of the two. In our case, we have both solar and we have a generator here. So they both actually help each other. It's not as if one is better than the other. You're seeing a lot of water spray ports being put on the side. I think that was kind of led by Alliance. Alliance kind of pioneered the use of a spray port on, you know, the camping side of your RV, and I think they did a great job with that because it was really needed. Being able to spray things off out here, if you have a cooler, you just had fish in it, stuff like that. You can always go to your wet bay and use the shower over there, but it's usually a pretty crummy experience. But having, you know, a reasonably pressured spray port over here is super awesome. Outside kitchens, some people love them, some people hate them. It's kind of like the sunroof in a vehicle. It's going to be very, very, you know, specific to a person's camping lifestyle and whether or not they feel like cooking inside or out. And like I said, a lot of people will only get an RV that has an outside kitchen. Some people will absolutely avoid it like it's the plague. I mean, I don't like sunroofs. Some people love them. I like outside kitchens. Some people don't. The steps. I do talk a lot about steps because steps are very important. It's what you're going to use to get into and out of your RV. And it's always good to have a step system that works well for you. Now, I love this Lippert Solid Step XF because it has the widest steps available. Now, Moride and other brands make steps that are available, but typically the rails are much closer together and the actual step portion is much narrower. Now, the downfall of this step system is that it doesn't feel quite as solid. Even though it is solid and it still, you know, holds a lot of weight, it doesn't feel quite as solid when you're going up it sometimes. So just keep that in mind. I don't think there's any risk that it's ever going to fail on you, but if you look at this versus like the Moride product, the Moride uses much thicker rails going down the side, but because of that, it has a much narrower footprint whenever you're entering or exiting. I talk a lot about the sidewall material. Now, not all brands use composite sidewalls. This is an Asdel equipped RV, which means the sidewall here is made out of a composite material called Asdel. It's essentially a panel that's a mixture of like fiberglass and plastic, and it won't allow delamination. So basically, this fiberglass sheathing that goes over the Asdel has a very low risk of ever delaminating from that Asdel. If you see RVs that look like the walls are bubbling off, that's because the backer behind the fiberglass overlay is a wood backer. And if water or moisture gets in there, it can cause the glue to break free and start to delaminate and even rot and cause mold. So Asdel is absolutely a great product to have on RVs. Delamination, even on non-Asdel equipped RVs, has gone down quite a bit, but it can still happen, and it typically will start from the front of the RV and kind of start working its way back. Or if you have some type of a water issue, that's really where it will start rearing up its ugly head. But yeah, having a composite sidewall like Asdel is a game changer for people who want that extra peace of mind. All right, so I really appreciate you guys for checking out this video. The next half of this video is going to be inside of the RV, talking about the things that I look for, the things that I try to keep an eye on regardless of the floor plan. So this is taking the floor plan, putting it aside. These are things that you might want to take a closer look at if you're going to be walking through an RV considering it, because there's a lot more than just the floor plan you should consider when buying an RV. Anyways, guys, I sure hope you've enjoyed this video. Please take a moment to subscribe to my channel so you can check out the next video and see the inside. Guys, if you haven't had a chance, please take a moment, subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up, and we'll talk to you again very soon.